Welcome to an hour of creativity, transformation, and inspiration. We're going to showcase 8 furniture makeovers. We're going to go through the before and after, and you're going to be amazed at what we can create. I'm going to break it down for you and also inspire you with what's possible when it comes to furniture transformations. So it's time to grab yourself a coffee, sit back, relax, and be inspired. This is just one of the incredible before and after makeovers you're going to see. There's no more need to delay. Let's get into it. Our journey begins with Furniture Flip 1. This is a pair of bedside tables that I purchased on Facebook Marketplace for $50. The varnish on top of this pair of bedside tables was ridiculously hard. It did actually take me a lot longer than usual to sand back to raw. Once I'd gotten the top of the table sanded back to raw, I then also needed to do a scuff sand of the entire piece ready for painting. Scuff sanding a piece doesn't actually take very long, but it really does set your piece up ready for success. Scuff sanding just enables the paint to stick really well to the surface, because if you leave a glossy surface, your paint is going to not stick and you may end up with having chipping or scratching when the paint comes off really easily. While I was sanding, I also decided that I wanted to sand back the kickboard and the base of this piece to raw timber as well to match in with the timber on top. So I went back and did that before I moved on. All up, I did actually spend a couple of hours cleaning this piece. It did take longer than I would have liked it to, but in the end it's going to be worth it because I really love having some raw exposed timber. It just brings so much warmth into the piece and really makes it feel homey. When cleaning the furniture, I like to use a degreaser. This is just to make sure that there's no grease or grime or any kind of sticky marks on the furniture that would stop the paint from sticking in particular areas. I did mask up this piece. You'll see throughout this video that I do in certain circumstances mask up, and then sometimes I don't mask up and I just re-sand the timber area once I have painted. It really doesn't matter which way you go. You can use the masking tape and get a nice clean line, or if you've got an area where the timber stops up next to where you've painted, you can actually just go back and re-sand that area. Next up is the primer. I use a few different primers depending on what color I'm going to be painting the piece. Every primer that you use, you really need to have good adhesion properties in the primer. However, if you're going to be painting the piece a dark color, you don't need to be able to stain block and stop the tannins in the timber bleeding through. And if you don't need the stain blocking properties, it's usually a lot easier to use a water-based adhesive primer. That way then you don't have to use mineral spirits to be cleaning up, and you can just clean everything up with water. I swear every single time I post a video, someone says to me, if I use chalk paint or I use a specific paint, I don't need to do all my sanding and all my priming, and I can save myself a whole lot of steps. However, I have tried a lot of different paints, and if you don't prep the surface, even if you're using one of these paints, usually you don't get a great end result. I gave the piece a quick sand in between my primer and my paint. This just removes any dust or particles that may have gotten into the primer, and it leaves me with a nice clean surface when applying my paint. I usually apply the paint with a brush and roller. However, you can apply this with a spray gun as well. It's really just a personal preference as to what option you prefer. If you're not a regular DIYer, it's unlikely that you're going to have a sprayer available, and therefore it is just as good to use a paintbrush and a roller to apply your paint. This particular image here and this video is a really great way to show you how I apply the paint to try and minimize brush strokes and roller marks. I start by creating a picture frame using the paintbrush and paint all of the bits that the roller is not going to be able to get to. Here you'll see that I'm just painting this baseboard. I'm then going to go around all of the outside and create that picture frame. And then once I've got the picture frame, I'm going to get a little bit of paint onto the roller. Make sure you don't get too much paint on the roller. You don't want it to be dripping. Then you're going to start using the roller, working up and down in one section. Once you've got that section completely done, you're then going to move over, get a little bit more paint on your roller, and go up and down the next section. Once you've done those sections, you're going to go back over and blend it together with the initial section you first did, and then keep working your way through the whole piece. Once you've done the whole piece, you're then going to go back over that entire section making sure that there's no roller marks in between. If you have one section and then you don't blend it back in, you can have a line where the roller ends, and you want to try and avoid that. I then applied a timber stain and glaze to the top of this piece. I'm using a driftwood timber glaze in this particular instance. I didn't want to darken the timber too much. I really just wanted to add a little bit of grey tones, which is going to tie in really nicely with this grey blue paint colour that I've selected, and it's one of my favourite timber colours. I wanted to do something a little bit different with the top coat on this piece, and it's definitely not something I do in any of the other pieces. However, I applied a white wax top coat. I just did this by rubbing in a circle and blending this to create kind of like a beachy effect. It's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but I really like it. I then kept going with my beachy theme, and I picked a couple of handles to try out. I decided to go with the shell knobs, and this is how it turned out. It is absolutely gorgeous. I had no problem selling these for $400. Now brace yourself, it's time for flip number 2. This one is a pretty exciting one. Okay, first things first, we need to clean, but we need to make sure we use a rubber glove. I did once use the degreaser without a rubber glove, and I did actually end up getting quite sore skin. I didn't think it would be the case, but it was. So make sure you use a rubber glove if you're going to use abrasive chemicals. This is just a crystallized degreaser that you mix with water. When I went to clean, I found some spiders in my drawer, so I decided to get out the broom and just give the drawers a bit of a sweep out first before I started cleaning with my degreaser. I'm not a big spider fan. In fact, there's actually a really great story where I got bitten by a white tail while I was flipping furniture, but that's for another day. It's really important when you're cleaning that you make sure you get into all the little nooks and crannies. Sometimes people choose not to paint certain sections. However, I usually do paint any section that is regularly visible, and in this instance, these shelves in this TV unit are visible all the time, and I needed to make sure that I was going to paint them. Then it was time to remove the hardware. You can do this with a screwdriver, a drill, or even like a mini electric screwdriver. It's really up to you. However, if you don't have a lot of tools on hand, a screwdriver is more than good for the job. If you're trying to save costs on your makeover, if you're doing the makeover for yourself, or if you're flipping it but you've got a really tight budget, you might decide to reuse the original hardware. There was nothing really wrong with this hardware. I just decided that it wasn't specifically the type of hardware that I wanted to use on this flip, and I did actually buy new hardware, but it's up to you what to do. I then applied my safety gear again, got my safety glasses and my earmuffs, and I'm good to go. I got the belt sander out to start sanding this piece. Usually if I've got a large flat surface, something like the top of a TV unit, the top of a coffee table, anything that's a large area that is going to be easy to sand, I usually use the belt sander first just to save myself some time. Once I've got the top layer of varnish removed with a belt sander, I usually swap over to the orbital sander because it does give a much nicer finish. The belt sander is quite abrasive and can be known to dig into the timber a little bit too far. That's why I usually only use it for the top layer and then swap to the orbital sander. As normal, if there's some sort of lip or edge to the top of the timber, I usually try and have that as raw exposed timber because it just gives a nice overall finished appearance. In this instance, I actually had a beautiful flat edge, so I could just use the orbital sander to sand along this flat edge and get that to be raw exposed timber as well. Now, I wanted to have the front of the drawers as exposed timber to match in with the timber everywhere else. It usually has a really nice effect when you do have multiple places of raw exposed timber. I used the belt sander to strip the top layer off. However, I do not recommend this. It is actually really hard to hold the drawer still while you're using the belt sander. It can be quite dangerous, and the belt sander can quite easily get away from you, so it is much better to use an orbital sander for this. A battery sander is nice and light and easy to maneuver, and that's why I often swap to my battery sander when I'm doing those tilted edges. It was then time to go back over the entire piece with some higher grit sandpaper. I always start with an 80 grit, build up to a 120 grit, and then go from there further up to a 240 or a 400 grit. When I'm doing a scuff sand, I usually use the 240 grit, and if I'm using a veneer piece, I skip the 80 and start at the 120. You'll get to know a little bit about the sandpaper grits and what's the best grit for the circumstance, but a good rule of thumb to remember is the lower the number, the more coarse the sandpaper, the higher the number, the softer and more delicate it is. Then it was back to cleaning again and making sure there was no dust on there before I painted. You do feel a bit like Sadie the cleaning lady when you are a furniture flipper or a DIYer, because cleaning is actually such a crucial component. I grabbed out my primer. This time I am using a water-based primer again, and it does have stain blocking properties. However, I'm painting this grey, so I don't really need them. I applied the masking tape to the areas I needed to keep separate. If there needs to be a clear, defined line, you must use masking tape. Then I applied the primer. I made sure I applied the primer on the top of these shelves as well. It is not very visible, however, I like to make sure that there is primer and paint wherever it is going to be potentially seen. I grabbed out my paint, and it's this beautiful grey sage green mix colour. I absolutely love this colour. I wanted to add a little bit of special detailing to this piece. I decided on this stencil design. This is a really easy to use peel and stick stencil, which you just apply, stick on, and then you can paint your stencil design. It just makes it a little bit easier to not get bleed through because the stencil is actually stuck to the side of the piece. You're just going to use your paintbrush and then paint over everywhere that you're going to have in that stencil, and then simply peel off the sticker once you have finished painting. Now it's time for my second coat of paint. You'll see that I always apply at least 2 coats of paint. When you're painting a lighter color such as white, you might end up painting 4 or 5 coats. Usually I only need 2. It's just certain colors you need to paint more than 2 coats for. Time for another satisfying masking tape peel. It never gets old. If you've never heard of snap-off screws before, you need to get onto it. These amazing screws have little indents in them where you can just grab a pair of pliers and then snap the screws off to the length that you need them. Just measure the length that you need and then snap the screws very easily. I don't very often paint the inside of the drawers because usually there's a lot of work involved that you can't recoup the cost of when you are selling your piece or on a commission job. This is just a wood butter. You can see here how much life gets brought back into this timber by applying a wood butter, and it's a really great solution that you can use without having to paint the inside. I wanted to keep this beautiful light colored timber, so I mixed up a paint whitewash and applied the whitewash onto the timber. I'll show you in one of the other videos how I actually create this paint whitewash, but for now it's just a mix of water and paint. And this is how it turned out. It is absolutely gorgeous. The colors of the timber and the paint just go so well together. Now it's time for furniture flip 3. This one is a fun one with a cute stencil design. I started off with a belt sander like usual because when you're flipping furniture, time really is money. When you start doing this regularly, you really want to be trying to concentrate on improving your productivity and your speed in terms of how fast the project takes you, because the less time that it takes, the more profit you actually have. If you're a beginner though, you're really only going to use one orbital sander. I got away with having just one battery powered orbital sander for the first year and a half that I was flipping furniture, so you definitely do not need a lot of tools. However, the more tools you have, usually the faster you can go with the project. I tend to swap between each of my sanders. I still like to use my battery sander because it is light and easy to maneuver. It's really great to do all those hard to reach areas like the sides of these bedside tables. In this video compilation, you'll start to see that there is definitely a process to this, and I do the same steps every time. I usually have a process when sanding. I start with an 80 grit, move to a 120 grit, and finish off with a 240 grit. I then removed all of the hardware. On this particular piece, I'm not going to be reusing the hardware. I'm going to be applying new hardware. And because it does actually have 2 holes for this hardware, I'm then going to need to fill these holes and drill a new hole so that I can install new hardware with just one singular bolt. But as I mentioned earlier, it's really about why it is that you're refinishing the furniture. There are so many benefits to refinishing furniture, and it's not necessarily just flipping furniture for sale. As I scuff, sand and clean the piece, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the benefits of refinishing furniture. The first one is about saving money. Obviously, buying new furniture can be a really expensive investment, whereas if you've got original furniture that has been built of quality construction, usually it is much cheaper to just refinish your furniture and give it a facelift. But it's not always all about money. There's actually a huge environmental impact from people who just continuously throw out furniture into the landfill. And here in Australia, it's also commonly referred to as the tip. As furniture refinishers, we actually save a huge amount of furniture going to landfill because usually there is something that can be done with every piece that's going to be thrown away. Here in this clip, I'm just filling in the old hardware holes. I do it in quite an unconventional way sometimes. Basically, I just fill it in with my fingers, let that dry, and then apply a nice smooth layer with the spatula over the top. When using wood filler, you usually need to do this in multiple thin layers. That's why I use my fingers and push the wood filler into the holes initially, then let that fully dry, and once it's dry, I go over the top with that to create a nice smooth finish. The idea is to make it look as seamless as possible so that you don't know that there has been any previous holes there. Once the wood filler's dried, you're then going to sand off the excess. Another benefit of refinishing furniture is actually the customization. When you go to a shop, often you find a piece of furniture that you like, however, it is not the exact colors and styles that you want it to be. When you refinish furniture, you have complete control over what you can create. You can choose the paint colors, the stain colors, the top coat, the gloss, the finish, you name it. This is one of my favorite reasons for refinishing furniture. I just love being able to come up with unique, one-of-a-kind designs. But it doesn't always have to be out there designs. A lot of people choose to refinish their furniture because the piece of furniture has some sort of sentimental value to them. Quite a lot of the pieces of furniture, and especially commission work that I have done in the past, has been people that have that sentimental value to their furniture. It may have been a piece that's been passed down from their parents or from their grandparents, and then they've decided that they want to refinish the furniture so that they can keep that piece and keep that memory alive. I always apply a primer, and I mean, if somebody is paying to refinish their furniture, if you're doing a commission piece, or even if you're doing your own piece, you don't want to be doing all of this work for nothing. If you don't do the correct preparation work, you're really shortening the life of the piece and the durability of it as well. For this piece, I'm using Fusion Mineral Paint Raw Silk. It's a really nice light color, but it goes on really well, not like a white. It has much better coverage. When I'm using my roller, I just put a plastic bag over the tray like shown here. This way it just saves me a little bit of time in cleanup. Now, as you probably realize, the shops these days are full of furniture that is just cheaply made and all full of chipboard and laminate. Usually older furniture is much better made with a higher quality. It's usually got a lot more solid timber in it, and it's really great to be able to refinish this because it does have such strong bones. All you're doing is really giving it a facelift. I don't know if you've ever undertaken a project yourself. However, it doesn't matter whether it's a craft project or a DIY project. Every project that you start, there's usually a sense of satisfaction when you finish that project. The same applies to refinishing furniture. Honestly, it is the best feeling when you finish your work and you look back and think, I did that. I actually created this on my own. It's really amazing, and it's well worth your time and effort to be able to sit back and admire your hard work and what it is that you've created. You get to feel good about the fact that you have stopped a piece of furniture from potentially going to landfill, but you also get the satisfaction of seeing a piece that was old and tired turn beautiful, and that is priceless. I truly believe everyone is capable of refinishing furniture. It is really quite simple. You just need to know the steps to take in order to get a quality finish. I have a beginner's course course which goes through everything step by step from the start to the finish to make sure that you don't miss any steps and explains to you in detail what it is that you need to do. I have helped hundreds of people create their own statement pieces and made their home become an extension of their personality. If you would like to know a little bit more about this course, you can read more in the description. Because the drawers on this piece were really flat and quite plain, I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit out of the box. So instead of leaving them the cream color that I was painting the rest of the piece, I decided that I was going to paint them a bit of a darker color, and this brown was what I chose. I then picked out a stencil design that I wanted to put on top of the brown to match it back in with the cream, and then I got a sponge out and started sponging on the stencil. Now, usually you would apply a stencil with a roller to get a nice finish. However, for this piece, I decided I wanted to have a bit of a play and do something different. This was the first time I used a sponge to apply a stencil, and I just grabbed the paint very lightly onto this sponge and then started sponging it on into that stencil design. I know, it's not for everyone, and some of you are probably sitting there cringing, thinking, no, what are you doing? But part of the fun about refinishing furniture is just experimenting and being creative, and that's what I'm doing here. Now, to apply a treatment to the timber, for this piece, I did something a little bit different, and I've actually got what I'm calling a tan wash in this little container here. What it is, it's a mix of the brown paint that I used on the front of the drawers with water. It's quite a low ratio. I would say probably 1/8 paint to mostly water, and I'm just trying to incorporate that color and blend the piece together. I applied the new hardware, and I actually selected a shell knob for this too, and that's also not going to be everyone's taste. Then I applied the top coat onto the piece. This is a clear water-based polyacrylic, and I'm using a top coat sponge to apply it. When applying the top coat, you just need to make sure that you don't go back over the top coat once it has started to dry, and then you work quite quickly because it does start to dry quickly. And here they are, the end result, flip number 3. I sold this pair of bedside tables for $390 within 24 hours, so someone fell in love just like me. Now we're at the halfway mark. Time for flip number 4. This is 2 side tables. Now these for me were actually a commission piece. I was commissioned to strip the top stain off, whitewash the top of the table, and paint the rest of the piece white. This makeover is the perfect example for beginners. I usually suggest when you first start out, you try out on a small side table to test out techniques and paint types so that you know what it is that you like before you start on any big pieces of furniture. You also want to try and find something solid wood for your first piece. It is much easier to work with solid wood than it is to work with a veneer. This way, you don't have to worry about sanding too far and burning through the veneer. You've really got plenty of leeway when it comes to sanding and sanding off that original varnish. I wanted to do a little bit of a test here with the 2 sanders. That's why I've got the belt sander sitting on one table and I'm using the orbital sander on the other. I wanted to see how much time difference there was between using the belt sander first and then using the orbital sander, and just using the orbital sander for the entire project. The results were actually quite surprising. This is quite a powerful orbital sander, and it is from the professional Makita range, but I did only save off 1 minute of time by using the belt sander first and then swapping over to the orbital sander. So it definitely, in this particular instance, wasn't that necessary to use the belt sander. It also really depends on the thickness of the varnish and the type of varnish. Some varnishes will sand off a lot easier than other ones, and it's usually the really thick varnishes where you really need that belt sander. I've just scuff sanded the entire piece, and now I'm doing a nice deep thorough clean with my degreaser, getting myself ready for paint again. I applied the masking tape to the edge of the furniture. Most of the time I do prefer to use the masking tape, whereas as I talked about earlier, you can resand the edges. If you are going to be using a masking tape, make sure you run your nail along the masking tape and really push it down nice and deep before actually moving on. I tipped these tables upside down and put them on another coffee table just so that it was a little bit easier to paint them. I'm applying the primer first. If you have any issues with your back or your knees or any parts of your body really, you do want to try and lift them up so that they're at standing height. I actually really like working on the floor. I know it's not probably that great for me. It's just something about it that finds me very grounded and very therapeutic when I'm working on the floor. I have tried all kinds of different hydro lifts and I've tried different things to lift my furniture up high, but I always come back time and time again to just working off the ground. I usually, once I'm painting, like to just crank my music and get down to it. It's really nice to just have that moment where you are painting, and painting can be so therapeutic if you allow it to be. Like art therapy, it's just a great way to be with yourself and your emotions and really just enjoy the stillness. Now, I just wanted to show you up close the difference between 2 coats and 3 coats of white paint. Here you'll be able to see that it is quite patchy. There's some easy, obvious brush stroke marks here and roller lines. This is what it looks like after 2 coats. I'll then take you over and show you what it looks like after 3 coats. It just gives it a little bit more of a full complexion. You'll be able to see that now that this piece has got 3 coats, there's a little bit less with the roller marks and also with the brush strokes. I'm not still 100% happy with this though, and I am going to apply a 4th coat. You'll find that when you are working with white paint, you do have to do a lot more coats than what you would like or what you would need using a darker color. Once I had applied 4 coats of white paint on the legs and base of this piece, it was time to whitewash the timber. I didn't want to do too much whitewash because we really wanted to keep the timber as original color as possible. This is a very light whitewash just to keep that original color. I paint the whitewash on and then wipe off any excess, working along as I go. I don't want to leave the whitewash on there too long. It soaks in certain areas in different ways and then can look quite patchy. You just need to make sure you're happy with the color of the timber before you apply the top coat. Here you'll be able to see one of these tables has had the top coat applied and the other one hasn't. Timber always looks a little bit lighter before you apply the top coat, and this is the example of what it looks like before and after applying the top coat. So make sure the color of your timber is what you want it to be before you apply your top coat protection. I'm using the clear polyacrylic top coat again, applying with my sponge, the same as what I usually do. I find it is by far the easiest way to apply the top coat to get a really nice seamless finish. And here she is, the end result. I only staged one of them, but they're exactly the same. A new light, bright, fresh look. Next up is flip number 5. Now this one is one of my personal all-time favorite flips. Now this is what it looked like before. This was a commission piece for a client. However, my client just gave me the color choices she wanted and then gave me full creative control over how I refinished it. Those are definitely the best type of commissions because the client understands that you have a creative feel about a piece, and often when you start working on a piece, you come up with some really cool ideas that you wouldn't necessarily think of when you were initially working on the piece or initially quoted the piece even. I find that a lot of my creativity actually comes to me once I start working on the piece. Most of the time when I go into a piece of furniture, I don't actually know what it is that I want to create. Sometimes I'll create a piece specifically for a paint color or a handle or something that I have in mind that I'm wanting to use. But if I don't have anything in my mind or any kind of preconceived idea about what I want it to be, often once I start sanding it back and revealing the colors or sanding certain sections, I'll then get these really cool ideas pop into my mind. This one was a really thick varnish and it definitely did need the belt sander. It took me quite some time even working with the belt sander to strip the original varnish off the top. Once I'd got that top layer of varnish off, I then, as usual, swapped to my orbital sander and started working through with the orbital sander to remove the rest of the varnish and leave a nice smooth look. Now the preparation work is almost done. Yay! Now it's time to move on to the fun part. You would have seen in those clips that I actually decided to sand all of the fronts of the drawers and the doors like a picture frame. I sanded the flat outside layer and then I've left the inside of those pieces where I'm going to paint. I'm applying the primer here to the body, working my way through the entire piece. And then I grabbed out my paint. This is a green called Myrtle by an Australian brand, Pureco. It's the color that my client chose as she wanted a really nice deep country green. You'll see here me hand painting inside this picture frame in all of these little drawers. This was definitely the most time consuming part of the project, but it was definitely worth it when you see the end result. I really enjoyed this project because when I have a paintbrush in my hand, it really is just like my mind goes silent. When I'm concentrating on painting the details of the piece in all of those little nooks and crannies in these drawers, but also when I'm painting the body of the piece, it just enables me to feel like I am achieving something and just be present in that moment. I'm the kind of person that is constantly working, constantly overthinking. My mind is always going on something. It doesn't matter what it is. And when I'm painting, it just enables me to clear my mind of everything else that's going on and just be there in that particular moment. If you're like me and you're the person who carries a lot of stress, try giving painting a go. Whether you're painting furniture or painting a canvas or painting a piece of paper even, just the act of painting is really therapeutic. Now I chose not to mask up these edges. It was just going to take way too long to mask up. So once I'd finished painting, I grabbed out my orbital sander and I went over all of these timber edges to make sure that I didn't have any runs of the paint and to get a nice clean line. I then applied a stain and glaze to all of the timber and I chose what's called sepia stain and glaze. It's a really warm, earthy kind of tone that has a little bit of yellows and a little bit of browns coming through. Once I had finished applying the stain and glaze over the entire piece, I then applied my top coat again. Because this piece was going to have a fair bit of traffic, I applied 5 coats of this clear polyacrylic top coat. Put it all back together again, reapplying the doors and the hinges, and then inserting all of the drawers back into their required locations. I put new hardware on. My client also selected this hardware that she wanted. But my client actually had really great taste and I think the hardware that she chose was perfect for the piece. Once I started putting it back together, I knew I was in love. Here it is, a one-of-a-kind statement piece that you cannot buy in furniture shops that my client fell in love with and then ended up commissioning another piece to match. Time for flip number 6. This was also a commission piece that my client came to me with and decided she wanted to refinish. She still used this as a dresser in her bedroom and wanted it to just be a little bit more modern. You'll see here there's quite a fair bit of damage on the piece and the veneer was lifting a little bit and we had our work cut out for us. To start off with, I needed to clean the entire piece. I wanted to go a little bit quicker, so I just grabbed out the cleaning bit on my drill and just gave this a really nice deep clean with the degreaser. Once I'd finished with the drill, I grabbed out a cloth and went over the entire piece to remove any moisture. I don't want to leave any thickness of water on this piece because it is a veneer and a veneer can easily bubble if you leave moisture on it. I had to let the piece thoroughly dry. Please do not try and sand the piece if there is still any moisture in the piece. The sandpaper will just clog up and you will not be able to sand the piece. It needs to be 100% dry before you start sanding. My client wants the entire piece painted black with a gloss top coat and therefore all I need to do is a scuff sand of the entire piece. Because there was a little bit of lifting in the veneer, I needed to do a little bit of repair work to some of the piece as well. I scuff sanded the entire piece first and then decided I was going to do the repair work. You'll see here that I'm just applying some wood filler into some of the cracks and I also needed to glue some of the original veneer back down again. And here I go doing an unconventional method. I still use my fingers to feel along wherever I can feel that it is not flat and then push the wood filler into those cracks. Then sanding off that excess wood filler to try and make that nice clear flat surface. Grabbing out my kids' statement sharp bucket, I then decided to clean again. I lost my cleaning bucket and this was the best thing that I could find. You wouldn't believe it was a topic of choice on social media. I had lots of people commenting about this cool as shark bucket. I then had to prime the whole piece and I'm using this can of spray shellac primer. I really wanted the primer to be a really strong adhesive primer and I'm just spraying this on to save myself a little bit of time. If you do spray anything, make sure you wear a respirator. Now that I've got the primer on, I'm going to grab a piece of 320 sandpaper. You could also use a 240 or a 400 grit sandpaper. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of an overall light sand, just to smooth it out before I start applying my paints. I just wanted to quickly show you what bleed through is. Here you'll see there is some red that is coming through this primer. This is called bleed through. It doesn't matter for me for this piece because I'm painting it black, but if you were painting a light color, you would then need to apply another primer before you could paint. I grabbed out my paintbrush, my roller, and my paint, making sure I give it a good shake before starting. Now let's just enjoy a minute of therapeutic painting. Here I'm using an oil-based spray polyurethane top coat. Then once I'd finished all of my painting, it was time to reinstall the hardware. We chose to keep the original hardware to keep the authenticity of this piece. And here it is, the end result, a glossy black beauty that my client loved. Can you believe it? We are already up to flip number 7. This is a Balinese style coffee table that had quite a fair bit of damage that needed to be repaired before we could give it a makeover. So let's get started. Now, the varnish on top was really thin and I could see it was already starting to crack and bubble. I grabbed out the carbide scraper and I started scraping a lot of that top layer of varnish off so that didn't end up in my sandpaper once I was sanding. A carbide scraper is an amazing tool I recommend every DIYer has because it will save you a fair bit of time. I then swapped over to my belt sander, my other time-saving hack, and then just continued to strip that top layer of varnish off. Most people say that they don't like the sanding and that the sanding is really hard work, but I personally actually really enjoy the sanding. It's like unwrapping a Christmas present as you're sanding away and revealing the timber underneath. You never know what it's going to turn out like, and it's really exciting to reveal what's underneath. Then I just kept sanding away until we got back to that raw timber. This was a really unique timber as it did have quite a lot of stripes in the timber and the different colors made it look so beautiful. I took all of these cute little drawers out, and as I was taking them out, I knew that I wanted to sand the top of the drawers or the face of the drawers to be timber as well. They had such a flat surface and were perfect for this. Now, this coffee table is also a custom request project from the person who purchased the grey and whitewashed TV unit earlier in this video. This coffee table was then needing to match that particular TV unit, and therefore she wanted the feet sanded so that we had the timber feet and the timber top that matched the design of the TV unit. She knew full well that the timber was going to be different because you can never get the same type of timber. This was completely different, and this is mango wood as opposed to the other TV unit, which was made of pine. But the idea was that we just matched the colors and the overall feel. As I mentioned, there was a fair bit of damage to this piece, so I mixed up some builder's bog and also applied some of the sanding dust into this just to make it a little bit more the color of the timber. Builder's bog is Australia's version of Bondo, and it's a really thick hardening agent that you mix with 2 parts to create this really nice strong material. I removed all of these old ring handles. I did not like them. I felt they made the piece very dated. We're going to be applying new hardware. Then I gave the piece a nice deep clean. When you are painting right up to the edge of your masking tape, it can help if you apply a line of your top coat there onto the masking tape. It just seals it and it just gives that really nice clean line when you peel the tape off. This is definitely not a necessary step. It's just an extra step that you can do if you have a line that you're wanting to get a really clear, crisp line on. Then, of course, we just needed to paint, applying the primer and then my grey paint in 2 coats. I'm going to show you a little bit deeper what I was talking about with the whitewash. I'm just taking some white paint, any white paint will do, mixing it with water, yes, just straight water, and then mixing that all together until you have a really smooth consistency. Once you've got the paint whitewash sorted, you're just going to apply that to the top of the table. You're just going to paint it on and then wipe off the excess. I'm going to show you up nice and close what this actually looks like once you've got the paint whitewash on the table and then when you're using your microfiber cloth to wipe it off. This is what it's going to look like. You're going to see the water almost beading on the top of the table. You're then going to take the microfiber cloth and run that along the table, trying to make sure that the actual whitewash comes in an even consistency. If you find that there's like a really white patch, you're then just going to use the cloth to wipe that patch out. Making sure that you are working in small sections and that you use the cloth to wipe the excess off before moving on to the next section. Otherwise, you will find that it does end up drying at different levels and soaking in different areas, and it will end up quite inconsistent. When you're a beginner, it can be quite difficult to get the whitewash to end up with this really nice, even finish. So it's just about practicing until you get it right. Then once again, applying the top coat. I always apply a top coat to any areas that I have timber, whether that's where I've done a whitewash or a tan wash or applied a timber stain and glaze. Every section that is timber gets a top coat. I don't always put a top coat on the paint. It really depends on the finish the client is after. I put it all back together again and here it is. Can you see how it matches the TV unit? What are your thoughts? Do you like it? It's really not everyone's cup of tea, but the client loved it. It matched the TV unit perfectly and it's a beautiful design. Now it's time for the lucky last one, flip number 8. Come with me and let's make over this coffee table. There must be something about having a coffee table and TV unit to match in your lounge room. This particular coffee table is going to match my green picture frame TV unit. This is a second commission that I had done for the person who commissioned that particular TV unit. And of course, we are doing the coffee table to match. I'm sanding the top back to raw timber, and then I'm going to be applying the sepia stain and glaze to the top, and we're painting the base green to match the TV unit. Taking on commission and custom work is not for everyone, and you're not going to feel comfortable doing it until you've got a fair bit of experience as a furniture artist. However, once you do have that experience, it is a really great way to bring in consistent revenue and also get more work. I find a lot of the time when people purchase one-off pieces of furniture from me, they generally like to custom order another piece to match, or also when they have a first commission piece done, you generally find if they love the end result, they'll come back to you and get more commission work done. It just gives you a little bit more reliable revenue in your business if you are making this into a regular thing, as opposed to when you're just selling and flipping your piece and putting it up for sale. You don't know how quickly that piece is going to sell, whereas the commission work is a much more consistent revenue. Of course, if you're just a DIYer, none of this means anything to you, and you're just here to have a little bit of fun and enjoy the before and afters, because who doesn't love a good before and after? I even appreciate all of the before and afters everybody else does, and it's amazing to see what people can create with furniture. I hope by now, if you've been with me for the last 45 minutes, you're now starting to get an understanding of the process involved in refinishing furniture. I really do the same steps on every single piece that I refinish. Once you know those steps, things get a little bit easier. I'm now applying the green paint onto this piece. This is the same myrtle green that I used on the TV unit. If you have been with me for this whole video, I really appreciate you sticking around and spending this time with me to go through 8 of my favorite furniture flips. They really are some beautiful pieces, and I hope you're inspired as to what you can create by refinishing furniture. I'd love for you to go away and now start looking at furniture differently and think about what it would be that you could create with some of your furniture. If you love all things DIY and refinishing furniture, you need to get on my email list. Every week I email out references to blog articles and new videos that I've created, but also some amazing tips on how to refinish furniture and how to make more money as a furniture artist. I'll leave the link to join my weekly newsletter down in the description. I know it can be really difficult to want to sign up to a newsletter, but I promise you this is full of value. I applied a heavy-duty gloss top coat on this piece at request from the client in case there was spills on their coffee table. Here it is, reveal number 8. What a beautiful piece. It matches in with the beautiful TV unit that was done and is a feature for their living room for years to come. Now let's quickly recap all of the makeovers. Here we have number 1, the bedside tables. Number 2 was the before and after of this beautiful TV unit. 3 was our stencil design of these bedside tables. 4, we had the beginner-friendly side table makeover. Then number 5 was this picture frame green TV unit. Number 6 was the Black Beauty dressing table. Number 7 was this beautiful Balinese style coffee table. And number 8 was our country green coffee table to match. I'd love for you to let me know in the comments which is your favorite. From 1 through to 8, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.